So here is Epicurus' argument for the conclusion that death is not bad for us. What's the point of this argument? Well, he thinks if it succeeds, then what it shows us is that our craving for immortality, our desire not to die, is based on a false assumption, namely that death is bad for us. Once we see that, he thinks that's the first step to eliminating that vain desire that causes all of us pain. So here's the first premise. It's rational for me to fear something, X, only if X will be bad for me. That is, when X happens, X is like an event. It only makes sense to fear something if it's bad for me. Now, we could kind of nuance this a little bit. You don't need to write this in your answer sheet or know it to reproduce it on the test or anything. If we wanted to, though, we could specify that it's rational for me to fear something only if I believe that it's bad for me. Or we might even say only if I justifiably believe that it's bad for me. For our purposes, though, we'll put that aside and just to simplify, it's rational for me to fear something only if it is going to be bad for me when it happens. Notice that the only if structure here, I mentioned this in class, we haven't seen an argument with an only if in the middle of it like this. It's a little bit of technical philosophical jargon. What's going on is that what comes after the only if is supposed to be a necessary condition for what comes before it. So the claim is that something's being bad for me is necessary for it to be rational for me to fear it. Or equivalently, if it's not bad for me, then it's not rational for me to fear it, right? So that's the first step. It's rational for me to fear something only if it will be bad for me. Our conclusion at the fifth step there is going to be, it is not rational for me to fear being dead. That is, my being dead. Notice this isn't the process of death, which Epicurus certainly thinks it is often rational to fear, nor is it someone else's death, also something that is rational for us to fear, precisely because both of those things can cause us pain. By contrast, our own state of being dead, that is the post-mortem state, is not something that can cause us pain. This is the basis of his argument. The second step, something X will be good or bad for me only if, signals a necessary condition, I will be able to experience X when it happens. X will be good or bad for me only if I'll be able to experience it. This second step ties together what is good and bad for a person to whether and how she experiences it. And the thought is, if you literally can't experience something as either pleasurable or painful, then it can neither be good nor bad for you. In your discussion posts, we talked a little bit about the ignorance is bliss aphorism. It's kind of what's being expressed in a more precise and rigorous way by NB2. It's tying together experience and what is in or against a person's interests. NB3 says this, I will not be able to experience being dead. What follows? Well, if we look at 2, it says, something X will be good or bad for me only if I'll be able to experience X. 3 tells us I won't be able to experience being dead. Therefore, at NB4, it follows that being dead will be neither good nor bad for me. Combine that with 1, which says it is rational for me to fear something only if it'll be bad for me. Well, if being dead isn't good or bad for me, then it's not rational for me to fear being dead. That follows from 1 and 4. And that's the conclusion of the argument. It's a valid argument. It's got 2 conclusions here, or 2 conclusions, one of which 4 is itself a premise. And the ultimate conclusion is it's not rational for me to fear being dead. We're going to spot Epicurus that first premise. It is rational for me to fear X only if X will be bad for me. I mentioned when I set it up on the screen here that we might want to fiddle with it a little bit, but there's definitely a version of that premise that I think is airtight. the two vulnerable spots potentially in this argument, and therefore spots that Epicurus needs to defend, are NB2 and NB3. So NB2 says this: X will be good or bad for me only if I'll be able to experience it. Why think that? Why think that I have to experience something in order for it to count in or against my interests? There are really two things going on here. I mean, Epicurus's defense of this claim is basically an appeal to hedonism. And so what you're seeing here is an important consequence of hedonism. The idea is that if hedonism is true, being dead is not either good or bad for us. Or in this specific context, if hedonism is true, then what's in a person's interests or against her interests has to be something tied to positive or negative experiences, that is, pleasure or pain. Why? Well, because hedonism says that the good life is the life of maxed out positive experiences, net positive experiences, or net pleasure. So Epicurus says, become accustomed to the belief that death is nothing to us. For all good and evil consists in sensation, but death is the deprivation of sensation. And so there you see this thought that hedonism's truth is what's undergirding this second step. We could also, I think, motivate the second step without being hedonists. I'm not going to walk through this example, but I mentioned in class the secret birthday party example. You can come up with your own like it that perhaps suggests that you don't have to be a full-scale hedonist in order to find something appealing about this principle. NB3 says, I will not be able to experience being dead. Well, again, why think this? Now, this Epicurus does defend this claim, but it rests on a controversial assumption, and there's no getting around that. Here's his defense of the claim that I won't be able to experience being dead. 3.1, first step. I can experience something X only if I exist when X happens. So I can experience it, that is, directly, only if I'm around when it's happening. 3.2, I will not exist when I'm dead. So if I won't exist when I'm dead, and I can only experience something if I exist when it's happening, it does follow, therefore, I will not be able to experience being dead. Of course, 3.2 is itself highly controversial. Suppose you believe in an immortal soul that survives the death of the body and that furthermore can experience, say, states of joy in perhaps an afterlife like a heaven, or states of pain in an afterlife like a hell. Then you're going to reject 3.2. No, it's not true that I'm going to fail to exist when I'm dead. I'll still exist, and furthermore, I'll be experiencing after I'm dead, right? And this is post-mortem existence. Epicurus just is assuming that there's no post-mortem existence. If you think there is, then you're going to reject this whole argument. And Epicurus is kind of like, that's fine. I'm really just interested in convincing people who, like him, don't think that there's a soul and life after death. Those are the people he thinks should be absolutely convinced that death isn't actually bad for them. Okay, so what we've just seen is hedonism's conception of the good life, and then an interesting consequence of hedonism, that death isn't bad for us. I'm just going to flag that, if your starting premise is, hey, if anything's bad, then being dead is bad, then you should not be a hedonist. In fact, you could turn this implication of hedonism on its head and turn it into an argument against hedonism. You might be like, here's my argument. Premise 1, it's bad to be dead. Premise 2, if hedonism's true, then it's not bad to be dead, therefore hedonism's false. I don't know how convincing that argument's going to be, but that's an argument against hedonism. Maybe it begs the question, maybe not. We're going to turn to a different argument against hedonism, one that perhaps doesn't beg the question. Or maybe it does, I don't know. This is from Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and this is the experience machine. Remember, an experience machine is a hypothetical machine capable of giving you any experience or series of experiences. Among other things, in the experience machine, you can plan out an entire life worth of experiences, however you choose. Whichever experiences you want, you can get them in the experience machine. Suppose that you are in the distant future given the option of plugging into the experience machine for the rest of your life to have whatever experiences you want. Do you plug in, yes or no? The overwhelming majority of you, when we talked about this in class, said absolutely not. Robert Nozick is kind of, rubbing his palms together and chuckling to himself. Like, of course they would say that. This is exactly what he expected. They fell right into my trap. He thinks you'll say, of course not, I don't want to plug into the experience machine. Nozick's point is that if you said, I don't want to plug into the experience machine, then you should reject hedonism. So the experience machine gives us an argument against hedonism. Here's the first step, EM1. If hedonism is true, then it would be good for me to plug into the experience machine. EM2, it would not be good for me to plug into the experience machine. How do I know that? Well, I said I wouldn't plug in, right? Precisely because I think it wouldn't be good for me. Therefore, hedonism is false. That validly follows, and the question is, why should we buy the two premises? The first step, if hedonism is true, then it would be good for me to plug into the experience machine. The idea here is that hedonism has this implication. It's in my interest to plug in. Why? Well, remember that hedonism says that the good, indeed best life for a human is the life of maximal net pleasure. That's just what hedonism says. Now, if there were an experience machine, I would be able to live the life of maximal net pleasure in the experience machine. Why? Well, because the experience machine is programmable with any experience or series of experiences you please. So you can, perhaps with the help of, some philosophers and some psychologists and whoever you want really to enlist in this process, you can select a life that is the most pleasant. Or maybe it doesn't need to be that complicated. I mean, maybe you can just program it to give you a 70-year-long euphoric high, and then you die, right? That's going to get you a lot of pleasure. You can get the life of max net pleasure in the experience machine. And if hedonism's true, that's the best life for you. Therefore, if hedonism's true, it would be good for you to plug in. The second step is it would not be good for you to plug into the experience machine. Each and every one of you, I think, has maybe slightly different reasons. If you said, I wouldn't want to plug in, for saying you wouldn't want to. Nozick basically is like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Whatever your reason was, he's happy to accept it. For those of you who weren't totally convinced, though, he would try to argue you into the position of not wanting to plug in. And he would point out some things that you would be missing in the experience machine that he would argue, at least, are obviously goods, that is, things worth desiring in and of themselves, that seem to be necessary for happiness, but that you would be completely missing in the experience machine. For example, it seems like you're not free in the experience machine. You're living a pre-programmed, determined life. Seems like it's something horribly selfish to do. It seems like your beginning of your life in the experience machine is an act of great immorality. Furthermore, whatever's going on in there, you're not actually developing real virtues. Even if part of the experience is the simulation of compassion, say, you, the person in the pod on the outside, you're not developing any character traits, good or bad. So you're missing out on the development of morality, or moral, the cultivation of moral virtue in yourself, which is like a desirable thing that we should all strive for. You also are going to be horribly duped your entire life about what's actually going on. You're going to be like the guy in the Truman Show, effectively, or somebody trapped in the Matrix. That's bad. Knowing basic facts about what the external world is like and which people you're talking to, and whether they're people as opposed to simulations, those are all good things that we want in our lives, and you'll be missing those things in the experience machine. You'll also be missing out on any real relationships and love. You can have the simulation of those things, but you won't be actually interacting with a real person. And we want more than just the feeling of love and the feeling of friendship. We want actual love with an actual person and actual friendships with actual friends. So in each case, Nozick is going to really try to, drive home the point. There's just more to the good life, according to him, than mere pleasure. And, if you're still like, hey, I would plug in, I don't care that I'm missing out on those things, Nozick's going to be like, okay, you're a committed hedonist. Fair enough. But for the rest of us, for anyone else who wouldn't want to plug in, what this is supposed to show is that, one, even if pleasure is good, it is just one good among many. And two, the things you listed as reasons not to plug in are, for you, additional goods that are necessary for your conception of the good life in addition to pleasure. All right, next time we'll talk about moral virtue.